Archie.
Dr. Adam Back, it's a great pleasure to host you for this chat. I've been wanting to talk to you for such a long time, and I hope you haven't found my direct messages. Well, actually, I've only recently been able to direct message you, but I've been trying to get around in back channels to organise this. So it's a great honour to finally host you for a discussion.
Well, it's good to meet you in person. We've been interacting on the public part of Twitter for a while, and so you're now have your own pod, so we can get into it.
Yeah, well, it kind of feels surreal because, you've been in this space forever and you're one of the earliest known figures in the space, and I think famously well known for being the first person that Satoshi emailed.
Yeah.
Have I got that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so what was the scene, the cryptography scene like back then before Bitcoin, and what were you guys talking about?
Well, the Cypherpunks were sort of a mailing list. Actually, there was also a physical meetup on Saturdays in the Bay Area, but I only ever got to one of those. But so mostly it's an online list, and they're talking about sort of self-sovereignty tech, basically, like encrypted voice, anonymous remailers, so you can have privacy and freedom of association in online discussions, and drive encryption, email encryption. And the way I got into that was at university when I was doing my PhD. A friend of mine was doing a master's degree, and he was implementing the RSA algorithm on his parallel computers. So I was doing a parallel computer related PhD, and so this fellow was working on the same type of parallel equipment we had to try and speed up RSA. And so he was just explaining it to me. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I understood from that explanation, I understood public key cryptography. And then PGP came along and kind of showed the self-sovereignty, social implications of that. And clearly the establishment didn't like it. So that's probably a sign that it's good, right? And you should want to use it. And so I thought it was really interesting. So I thought, well, there's got to be more things you can do with technology. After PGP came out, let me go find the people that are talking about other applications you could build with it, and that's where I found the Cypherpunks list. Yeah.
It sounds like, this space, a lot of people are kind of like, they have an anti-establishment, anti-government disposition.
Yeah.
And so meeting up in real life with these people, I would imagine that you're all a little bit cautious and wary of each other, given the penchant for intelligence agencies to take an interest in these sorts of groups and infiltrate. Well, what was that like when you first enter a real life meetup like that?
Well, I didn't get to go to many of them. I went to the Bay Area. Not sure when this would be.
Bay Area, San Francisco was what?
Yeah.
Okay.
So sometime in the mid-90s, I think, and got to meet some of the people I'd been interacting with on the mailing list for a few years, and they were fine. They were just had their opinions. The Cypherpunks were never really particularly, no kind of group think. They all had their own views and they're arguing about stuff, but they all liked the implications of strong cryptography. And I think it's a sort of culture of thinking for yourself and not taking it, just because somebody else says something, like somebody asserts something, the government says something, some authority or a university or academic report or the news say something, and you're like, well, is that true? Let me see if I can figure that out. Doesn't sound right to me. So immediately don't trust, verify kind of mentality, right? So I think that's part of it. Some of the Cypherpunks were interested in privacy for human rights activists or for, people trying to sort of be able to protest or organize in an authoritarian regime. And some of this is quite dangerous. If they make an operational slip-up, they could get captured by the authorities. So there's some people on the kind of privacy, human rights side of things, and some people were just like, this is cool tech. We have self-sovereignty. That's good enough for me, right? That was my viewpoint. So let's just go for maximum self-sovereignty and try and build it.
Looking for a secure, trusted way to buy, sell, and hold Bitcoin? Gemini has been leading the way since 2014. Founded by the Winklevoss twins to be a security-first, fully regulated Bitcoin platform. With Gemini, your Bitcoin is protected with enterprise-grade security, backed by insurance and Type 2 certifications for SOC 1 and SOC 2. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or a long-time hodler, Gemini gives you the tools to stack sats and build generational wealth your way. From simple one-tap buys to advanced charts and trading features, it's all here. Buy, sell, and hold securely. That's Gemini. Gemini. Bitcoin with confidence. Need cash without selling your Bitcoin? With DeBiFi, you borrow against your Bitcoin, non-custodial, multi-sig escrow, and you keep your keys. No banks, no selling. Just institutional grade liquidity with terms up to 2 years and APRs as low as 9%. All transactions are signed using private keys on your own device. Using a 3 of 4 multi-sig setup, 3 out of 4 keys must approve every transaction, giving you control, transparency, and peace of mind. Whether you're a hodler, miner, small business, or treasury team, DeBiFi gives you the cash you need now without giving up your Bitcoin upside or triggering a taxable event. Get liquidity, keep exposure, and stay secure. That's DeBiFi. DeBiFi, your Bitcoin, your money.
So you were doing your PhD, but were the other people that you met, were they primarily in had an academic background in academia or independent sort of computer scientists? What kind of backgrounds did people have? And
yeah, it's a bit of a mixture. So, I was the young guy at the time, so I was at university, and a lot of them were like maybe 5 or 10 years older than me. Like Nick Szabo's a bit older than me, Hal Finney's a bit older, and some of those guys were like working in industry. So I think Hal Finney actually became the first employee at PGP when it became a company, and he was a volunteer developer when it was an open source project. And yeah, Tim May was a bit older. He was a former Intel engineer on the actual CPUs, and so I got a range of ages, and of course you'd never know necessarily. So there were some academics, there were some industry people, but really the cypherpunks were interested in, not in, academic blue sky research, although there were some academics in there. It's really about applied cryptography. And there's a difference between academic cryptography and applied cryptography as a field, which is the academic cryptography is all about trying to get the next paper published and stake out, a candidate solution to something that nobody's proven before, or nobody's found a way to create that behavior, that cryptographic function. And if it's kind of weak and it might get broken, that's not the point. You showed it's possible. Whereas the applied guys, they just want something that's robust, so it definitely won't get broken, and they can depend on it. And saying, like what I would do is skim the academic papers and throw 90% of them away, like that's not usable, it's not relevant.
What are you looking for, like concepts that might be practical for you?
Yeah, like building blocks, because you're trying to solve problems, right? You're trying to, figure out how to make electronic cash work. You're trying to make the remailers work, and so you develop an idea of useful technical challenges that you want to achieve with cryptography, and they're not necessarily they're not easy to do. You've got to use some creativity, or you need a different building block. So you've got to think about how to create it out of the existing building blocks or think of something new. So in a way, Hashcash was one of those, right? Which is getting spam on the remailers. What do you do about it? Well, they're anonymous, so you can't block them. So you got to do something else. So I was looking around for, the favorite kind of holy grail application the cypherpunks were interested in was electronic cash, like bearer, hot electronic cash. And so, of course, the obvious solution to spam is you make the sender pay, and the recipient will get sort of mildly compensated for having to filter their email, let's skim the email and see if there's anything interesting, and it would become expensive to spam. But that was a much harder problem, to make a decentralized electronic cash system. People were trying since DigiCash as a centralized electronic cash system of extremely strong privacy and fungibility, but it failed because it was centralized ultimately.
On the email,
yeah,
I don't know anything about technical architecture of the protocol of email and anything like that, but one of the things that I've wondered is why isn't there a service that's it's permission only. You can only send me an email if I've whitelisted you. Is there anything technical that prevents that from happening?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess you got an introduction problem. And some people did something like that. They had a kind of a bouncer. So you would send them an email and an automated system would send you a mail back saying, please do this, type in the number in this image or, do something which would be tricky for an automated system to do. So there's a few things like that, which are getting towards that. But the remailers, it's harder with the remailer because the remailers are anonymous, so you can't reply to them. And you just get an email and it comes from like some kind of exit out of a network of randomizing nodes. And those are run by volunteers. So it's kind of like Tor for email, it's bouncing around inside a thing. And out comes some spam, and it's a lot of spam, and it's not even commercial. They're not trying to sell something. They're just trying to post onto Usenet discussion forums using the remailers. And I think we were suspecting they were doing it to try and create a backlash from the Usenet discussion forum operators. There's about 5,000 servers at different universities and ISPs with system administrators. And if they got sufficiently annoyed by spam coming out of remailers, maybe they'll block the remailers at that point. So
it's interesting the point of the topic of spam has come up because we're both on X, on Twitter, and for all their efforts since Elon has taken over the company, I've not been able to detect any kind of improvement in the spam problem. How is that email providers are so much better at blocking spam and filtering spam to junk than a platform like Twitter X is with respect to bot accounts?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's maybe they're not trying very hard or something. I'm not sure. Like, you get a lot of impersonators too, and they're actually, trying and sometimes succeeding to scam people by impersonating people. So, and they're clever, so they block the person they're impersonating, so you can't see them yourself.
That happens to me all the time. Yeah,
and it's there was a service called Scam Clerk, where you gave it your Twitter credentials so it could read it, and it would search for impersonators of you, and then give you a way to like click through and like check their, delete them. I mean, some of them are like legit parodies.
Oh, sure.
So that's fair game, but a lot of them are scamming. It shouldn't be that hard to tell because they literally use the same profile picture, right? So it's just a hint number one. And Twitter doesn't even seem to use that information. And then the other problem with Twitter is they, as the impersonated person, they make you jump through an enormous amount of hoops and give them real ID, which I don't really prefer not to do, just to even stand a chance at stopping, getting them to block an impersonator. So I don't know. They don't seem to care that much. And hopefully they would also integrate like Lightning or something so that you could at least put some kind of economic disincentive in there.
Well, I thought that would be the case as well. Like, an economic incentive will block many to make it unviable for them to do that. But now I'm seeing that so many of the spam bot accounts are actually verified. They've got blue checks.
Yeah.
They're paying a monthly fee. What is it, like $12, $16 or whatever it is a month? And so that doesn't seem to be deterring them at all. They're still...
Yeah, that's impressive actually, because they must make more than $12 by scamming people, or they wouldn't do it.
And they're obviously spinning up many, many thousands of accounts. Because they get blocked all the time.
They're dying like flies. Yeah, interesting. There was a interesting anti-spam solution on a Usenet discussion forum. So it's a kind of broadcast. It looks like an email list, but it's broadcast. So 5,000 nodes, flood fill. So a bit like the Bitcoin broadcast network, but for discussion forum stuff. And there's no central server, so you can't like block. It doesn't mean anything to block something, right? And so you get a lot of spam. And there's nothing you can do about it. So what some people proposed is NoCM, so NoCEM. So like I don't want to see this. So you could subscribe to a feed which is a list of posts that feed was saying spam, and then you could choose which no-see-em you subscribe to. And so, different people could curate a no-see-em. If the guy starts blocking valid stuff because he's, got a censorious kind of attitude, or he gets into a conflict of interest and goes rogue and starts censoring stuff, then you unsubscribe from that list and subscribe to another. You can subscribe to a couple. And so you've got a kind of decentralized way to, throttle the spam. And it saves everybody having to manually delete stuff that, you can sort of work together or subscribe to other ones. So I thought it's an interesting way to have a sort of decentralized thing which avoids the censorship, because Twitter people trick centralized systems into deleting things. So aggressive people, companies or litigious aggressive people will send them a DMCA takedown, like a false copyright assertion. Oh, they copied my copyright, you've got to cancel this account. And they, it's hard for somebody who doesn't have identity associated with the account to combat that. And they tend to listen a bit quicker if somebody gets a credible looking legal threat. And I suppose there's some process that, they're supposed to, there's a DMCA takedown notice process. So people are abusing that, actually. And so, that kind of nonsense. And Twitter, of course, is a lot better at not censoring things since Elon took over, but it's not immune. You'll get people that will get falsely banned or suspended, and then they're, trying to find some contact or friend of a friend who could ask them to undo that. It's quite hard to go through the resolution process too, because they don't seem to listen very much.
Yeah, Twitter has become much freer, and it feels like YouTube has hired all the old moderators from Twitter, because they're extremely censorious and very arbitrary in how they make their decisions, and there's no recourse to appeal decisions.
Well, it's pretty bad, because they were a little bit. I mean, you're just at the whim and mercy of, I don't know, some censorious-minded busybodies who have an axe to grind, and they don't like Bitcoin, or they don't like something else, and somebody put a lot of work into making a YouTube channel, and they get blocked. I'm like, what the heck? So, of course, a lot of people are anti-censorship, but I'm actually anti-moderation even, because it's just a slippery slope, right?
I was saying this the other day about, I'm actually happy to see a lot of objectionable stuff on Twitter now, because at least I feel like I've got my finger on the pulse of all the different factions of society. And, even things that I find personally objectionable, I just keep scrolling. I don't want them to be censored and to be prevented from expressing themselves, because then I feel like I'm being shielded from a reality, an aspect of reality that leaves me weaker.
Yeah, you always saw that on the Usenet discussion forums, because it was decentralized enough with 5,000 nodes and no centralized moderation, no way to do anything much, that you could get some pretty good flame wars on there, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So you just learn to deal with it. So people, they just have this saying, I guess the interfaces were a bit of command line stuff. So you press the N button for the next post, so it's just press N if you don't like it. Why are you trying to impose your worldview on this guy? He's got his views too, right? Just press N, and of course people could post stuff that you don't want to see, possibly, right, too. But that's where the no-see-ems come in, which is, you can subscribe to somebody who you think is, not going to get trigger happy and block stuff that you'd want to see. And you can always opt out of it. So the default is nothing. So you can read everything, right?
I wanted to ask you about that, because, because you were involved back in those days, and, there was a small cohort, 5,000 is not a huge number, and you're alluding to the culture at the time of, basically, you're going to see a lot of things that you're not going to like, and perhaps some aggressive flame wars, as you put it. How do you compare the current culture on Bitcoin timeline, for example, to what was happening back then?
That's what I'm saying. People start to get a bit, they get triggered too easily. I'm like, try Usenet. This is like a walk in the park on a calm day, right? Compared to the Usenet stuff is. it wouldn't take many discussions until they'd invoke Godwin's law. That same way as somebody starts accusing the other person of being a Nazi because the conversation didn't go how they want, and that'll be the end of the conversation. And so, I think you just what I was learning to do is just avoid responding to the negative part of it. If there's any technical comment that you were wanting to talk about in it, just respond to that bit and ignore the rest. And it is quite impressive. I mean, some people are just there to argue and they get wound up, right? But you could turn the conversation around. You just focus on the interesting part, and then wow, that guy actually has intelligent things to say. If you avoid the flame parts, right?
You know who does that really well? Lynn Alden.
Yeah.
And she's incredibly patient. She's got the patience of an angel with some of the most, I guess, obnoxious sort of interactions with her. And she does exactly what you just described. And it's very generous of her to share her thoughts. And quite often, like, she'll go, it's 10 replies in, and she's still going. And it's like, this is very admirable.
Well, I watched Lynn's presentation on YouTube. I think it was at the Vegas conference. Quite interesting. Something about I forgot the terminology for it, but like the turnings. So every 21 years, that there is a kind of shift in culture, and it goes in a 84-year cycle. And I think this is supposed to be like a generation, like people from their childhood to adulthood to middle age, and so on. And I guess it's kind of like the weak men lead to bad times. It's a similar concept, but actually people have done some kind of longitudinal study going back, I don't know, a couple of hundred years about trying to show that this is a repeating pattern. So Lynn was describing this and the economic, some graphs about the economics of it. So it's kind of interesting. So a lot of interesting economic output. But I think, on the Usenet, people will complain about the signal to noise ratio as a phrase they liked. So, the noise is so bad, there's only the odd post that's signal. There's just kind of moaning about it. I'm like, just generate some signal, be the signal.
That's an interesting thing, because I would have assumed that, of the 5,000 or so people on that list, or however many there were, everyone is obviously deeply interested in cryptography.
Yeah. Well, the noise would be, they really hated censorship and moderation, right? So, you get some spam and stupid stuff, but the other kind of noise, in a way, is it's very easy to get into the armchair philosophizing, right? So, people are complaining like, oh, politics is broken, look at this problem, or just get to philosophizing about how technology is going to fix it. Kind of like an older version of Bitcoin fixes this, right? But we're just going to build some technology. But there's somebody who will pop up and say, cypherpunks write code. In other words, we agree there are things that could be improved about society, but what are you going to do about it? They're sitting there philosophizing about it isn't going to change the world. Building some technology that could change things, that's where the action is. So that was where the cypherpunks write code is a kind of antidote to the philosopher kings that just want to sit around and talk about how the world could be made better if people would just listen to them, right?
Well, and also you guys are uniquely empowered in the digital age to actually do what you want, go and build what you're envisioning, right? You've got the skills, you've got the knowledge, and it's just a question of, as Satoshi proved, coming up with some formulation of what is already known and maybe identifying gaps.
Yeah, actually Eric Hughes, so the cypherpunks list was set up by 4 guys, Tim May, John Gilmore, Eric Hughes, and another John whose name escapes me. And so Eric Hughes wrote a Cypherpunks manifesto, and it's just like half a page, but it's like, we're gonna build the tools. We don't care if you don't like it. People are gonna use it if they want to, and that will change things. You can read the original words, but it's quite nice. So that was the philosophy, right? Let's improve things by doing things.
So where did you go from there in your early days on reading the mailing list, and what did you do next?
So I guess To figure out the timeline, yeah, I was probably still at university doing the PhD when I was reading that and taught myself C programming, network programming, a bunch of stuff. Like the undergraduate computer science didn't teach C at the time, they taught a bunch of other languages. So I thought that's a more pragmatic language, so I taught myself that. Network programming, a bunch of stuff, and spent, actually, my PhD was supposed to be about distributed systems. So actually I was one of the few people who knew what a Byzantine general's problem was before Bitcoin, because that's one of the topics in distributed systems that you want to know. It's a factor in how it's hard to coordinate in a decentralized network because there's no time, no clock you can trust, and the clocks can be wrong. People can misrepresent. You can say that I sent this an hour ago, but they didn't, they sent it now, and you can't prove it. So, to make an algorithm that works in that environment, it's hard. So anyway, that's what I was supposed to be doing, but I actually spent, probably 2/3 of the PhD going down a kind of applied cryptography rabbit hole in the cypherpunks list and implementing things and reading academic papers, looking for something that could be used to build something. And discussing it on a cypherpunks list with people like Hal Finney, Nick Szabo, and the other guys that were. There's probably, I don't know, a mixture of people. Some of them were enthusiasts, but not programmers, or they could do the mathematics, but not programming, or they're just generally, smart, motivated, interested people in there to try and brainstorm about how, what could be built, what would be useful, how to build it, that kind of stuff. So it's quite fun. So yeah, and they built a number of things, right? They built encrypted remailers. That was Hal Finney added PGP encryption to the remailers, and then Ulf Muller and Lance Cottrell. Well, Lance Cottrell implemented the mixed master remailer, which is a better type of, a more secure version of it, more privacy. And then because there were US export laws that you couldn't export cryptography software, Ulf Muller re-implemented it, same protocol from scratch over in Europe. And so, let's see what else was going on. Oh yeah, and Julian Assange was on that list. When Julian Assange popped up on the WikiLeaks scene, I was like, wait a minute, I know that name. And he was on the mailing list, not doing too much philosophizing, but he implemented something called Rubber Hose, which is an encrypted file system for like a hard drive that had hidden partitions. So you could, use it with one password and you'd see some data. But if you added another password, it would reveal another hidden partition, and you could never prove how many hidden partitions there were. So the unused space was filled with noise, and so you would never know, is there another partition lurking? Is another one? So it's kind of inception. So it's kind of interesting, security concept for somebody who's trying to, keep data private, might get pressured into revealing a password, but then they'd never know. Is there another one that they're holding out, right? So that's the concept.
Is that technology or that concept being applied at the moment to any kinds of applications or consumer applications?
I think you can do something like it with some of the encrypted file system like LuxCrypt on Linux, and there was a later encrypted file system called TrueCrypt. And I think it takes quite a bit to keep an encrypted file system up to date because the drive storage formats and the operating systems are evolving. Probably Rubber Hose doesn't work anymore because it's been a lot of years since he was working on that. But there was TrueCrypt for a while, but something strange happened with TrueCrypt, like the maintainer stopped maintaining it, and there was something suspicious about it, how that happened. So people got a bit suspicious about, did somebody take over maintenance of it? So they wanted to stop using it. And then the electronic cache, there were people working on implementing some of these protocols. I implemented a couple of the eCache protocols in a library called credlib, and there were some other libraries, something called, Magic Money? It's like an implementation of David Chaum's electronic cache, where you could run your own electronic cache server. So actually, philosophically, it's a bit like Cashew. You can run a server, and now you're the issuer, you're the bank, and if other people trust you, they might trust the coins you're creating. So there are lots of different like bits of technology getting implemented. The electronic cash was the hardest one, so it took a long time, and it wasn't, So when I posted about Hashcash for anti-spam in 1997, that was also in the context, so I did it because there was an electronic cash system, so I wanted something that's simpler, that still created a cost on the sender, but gave up on the respendability because that was one of the harder parts. And that became immediately a building block, a concept for decentralized electronic cash. So they realized, the lesson that everybody took from DigiCash failing in a business sense, and then the network went down because of that, was it needed to be decentralized, but that's harder. And so, one of the problems was how do you get value into it? Because DigiCash was expecting to get a bank, a corporate bank account. So it's hard to have a decentralized protocol with a corporate bank account, right? So then with proof of work, people realized that you could mine the coins, and that would bring them into existence without needing a bank, and there'd be a cost to doing that. So, lots of people figured that out immediately in 1997, like within days. But by 1998, Wei Dai had proposed B-Money and Nick Szabo BitGold, which were using Hashcash proof of work and trying to fill in some design ideas of how to do the rest of it. And I think one of the things that was not very decentralized about those designs was the difficulty, how to determine how much work you would have to do to get a coin. And so they had different solutions, but they tended to involve human judgment. So Wei Dai's had kind of super nodes or a group of humans who would decide once a month how much work you had to do to create a coin, and they would, use their judgment, benchmark some computers. So you just had to trust them collectively. And Nick Szabo's approach in BitGold was different, which is you just let it run wild, and then if there are a lot of coins, a lot of stamps, he was calling them, created in a time period, he would say those are not scarce, and if there are very few, they were scarce, and he would consider the scarce ones more valuable, and then it would be a job of the market to assemble a stamped book with a mix of scarce and not scarce stamps to arrive at a sort of standard value. So there's a precedent in this in stamp collection, like postage stamp collection, where you can buy a book of stamps and it's been graded, so it's worth $20 and it's got some rare ones and a lot of not so rare ones. And so there's specialists that will try to assemble standard value. So he thought you could have a market to do that, and then you could use that as the way to sort of stabilize. So those stamp books in Nick Szabo's BitGold would be the coins, and they would have a fixed value. So, but those were kind of too indirect, I think, and so nobody implemented it, right? I think if they had a satisfying solution, there's enough people there that were coders that would have tried to build it. And Nick Szabo built Hal Finney built another system called RPAL, Reusable Proof of Work. In 2004, he implemented that, but it was still centralized like the original DigiCash system, but it was using trustworthy computing. So kind of interesting type of hardware that was tamper resistant, and it could certify for the user connecting to it what code it was running. And so with that, you could have some degree of trust that it was doing what they said it was doing. Normally, if you got a server on the internet, it could tell you whatever it wants and do something completely different, right? But this, you could receive a signature that told you what code it was running. And so he implemented a DigiCash server, but with this hardware assurance. And then to get the coins, you do some work with Hashcash and it would give you a coin. And then you could respend the coin with some assurance. But then, I think it was, so those attempts never really solved in a decentralized way the inflation problem, right? Of how much work you'd have to do a coin, how you get to a stable value coin, so I think effectively you can see that those other systems were trying to get a stable coin synthetically, whereas Satoshi's solution to that was actually you don't worry about the stable value, you let the market decide what value is, and you try to control the supply. So you introduce the supply curve that, of course, we all know very well today, and difficulty adjustment to sort of keep the supply growing at a fairly precisely controlled rate. And that, it turns out, was a solution that nobody else had figured out.
It's really interesting listening to you talk about the previous incarnations, or at least attempts to create something like Bitcoin, because I'm familiar with Bitcoin. I'm not so familiar with that, and I'm not sure if it's because of the novelty of the descriptions.
Yeah.
But they just sound like they've got loose ends, or they're kind of messy in their architecture in some way or shape or
Right.
form. Whereas Bitcoin, in comparison, and maybe it is my familiarity with it, but it just seems such a simple, elegant solution in comparison to prior attempts. Do you think that's fair, or is it just because I'm so much more familiar with it?
No, I mean, I think there is some elegance about Bitcoin's design, like the fact that the proof of work is used to bring the coins into existence and simultaneously to make the transactions final, so you can't undo them because there's work piled on top. The other systems hadn't figured that out either, right? So there's some kind of neat tying together of everything. Plus, you don't have this kind of middle layer of humans or markets trying to just define what is a coin and what work you have to do. It just controls it. Because it turns out that, because we're looking at it, the benefit of hindsight, but it turns out that by having the difficulty adjustment, you can have a decentralized network automatically do something. It can automatically control the supply curve without any human judgment or involvement, right? All the humans can go away and leave some computers running, and they would keep that going, right? So, no human judgment involved, which is important, right? Because with Weidai's design, those humans could get into a conflict of interest. Eventually they'd become companies or institutions, and then become the new central bank, and you'd be back to where you started from, probably. Now, with Bitcoin, you don't have that, because it's pretty much a mathematical rate of supply, the supply curve, and it's enforced by the network. I think the other curious thing about Bitcoin is you have an economic incentive reinforcing the finality. So if you are mining, you've got two choices. You could either behave honestly and try to confirm transactions you've seen, or you could behave dishonestly and try to reorganize them to, double spend or something, right? And the interesting thing is if you were to try and double spend, you're fighting against the network, and you're probably going to lose. And then when you lose, you suffer a cost. It's like, well, if you're mining to make money and you lose money trying to attack it, then you stop. And whether you're honest or not, you don't want to lose money, so you play along, right? And so the only way to stand much chance of cheating the system is to have an enormous amount of hash rate. And as the network is very big, that's becomes impractical. So it's an interesting phenomenon. Now, the academics really didn't like Bitcoin for like the first 3 or 4 years. They thought it didn't look anything, the academics that led up to, David Chaum was actually, I think, one of the first to propose a way to get anonymity, privacy into an electronic cash system. And so over, probably a decade between his PhD thesis on blind signatures and a DigiCash company, there'd been a lot of academic papers trying to incrementally improve it, and they had a very clear idea of exactly how it should behave. It should be private, it should be unlinkable, so you couldn't see, who the previous spender was, and maybe it could be divisible so that you could make change in this framework. So they got all these ideas, but they were assuming that you can trust a server. Now they just that was how their design worked, and so they just assumed that was a reasonable assumption. But actually, it's quite a bad assumption. The central server can, maybe you shouldn't trust it. It can create more coins without you being able to check, and there's no protocol for verifying how many coins existed. Because it turns out that the privacy feature makes it impossible to audit effectively. So it's like in conflict. So anyway, that was how the academics thought it should work. And so when Bitcoin came along, it didn't work that way. They're like, oh, this is defective. And if you accept their assumption that you trust the server, bad assumption, but that's where they were, then it has extremely strong security because you've got public key cryptography, so you can't attack it. It's almost impossible to forge a coin, and you can't roll it back because the central server is deciding what's spent and not. And so here you have Bitcoin where, superficially it looks like it's not very strong, because if you could just, there's a level playing field between the attacker trying to double spend and roll back transactions and the honest participants trying to move the network forward. So like, that doesn't have the asymmetric security of public key cryptography, right? So they were not convinced that this was a sensible architecture, but looking at it from a more applied point of view, I could see that because I was familiar with those and implement some of those. So I was feeling the lack of cryptographic privacy, cryptographic fungibility, but I'm more on the applied side, so I could see that it was decentralized, and that was what went wrong before. So if you had to give up some privacy to get it, maybe you could improve the privacy.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the resistance from academia because of their preconceived ideas of what something should be,
right,
rather than accepting what was in front of them for what it is. Because the I guess not TradFi, but more so the media, the FUD that they've led with from the inception of Bitcoin has always been, but it doesn't do what we would expect a regular payment system to do right now, for example.
Yeah.
Like, for example, no one accepts it, or you can't buy a coffee with Bitcoin, which
right.
of course, that's the meme that we always go with, like whenever someone's going into a shop, paying for a coffee with Bitcoin is like, let's film it and post it, and it always gets a lot of traction, right?
Yeah.
And so we keep throwing that back in their faces. Look, you can buy a coffee with Bitcoin now. Yeah. And it has been the case for the longest time.
Right.
I was going to ask you, personally, running Bitcoin from Hal Finn, he was the first person to post it on Twitter. Were you on Twitter, or were you not the first person to actually run Bitcoin? Because you were the first person he emailed.
No, I didn't run it. I was happy enough to understand how it works, and Hal Finney was somebody on the list, on the Cypherpunks list, who would, go and read an academic paper and then write a report explaining it. So it's kind of handy efficiency move, because you can just read his report and not bother trying to decipher what the paper's saying. So sometimes they're hard to read because it's full of mathematics and stuff. And so, I read Hal Finney's field report of trying out Bitcoin. So here it was. It works like this. I think it's working like this, but he's kind of, he's not 100% sure, but he's tried it out and he's trying to figure out how it works, right? So I read that and I was like, oh yeah, I get how it works. Okay, let's see if it will bootstrap. So I actually didn't run it until like years later. Because my sort of big question was, would enough people get interested and stay interested for it to be develop an economic value, right? So I thought, well, if it is fantastic that Satoshi's figured out the problem that nobody had solved before, so that's cool. And also, the way he solved it, I was like, well, duh, why didn't we think of that? Because it looks really elegant, right, when you see it. And yet, a lot of smart people tried for like an internet decade to figure it out and didn't, right? So it shows you that like innovation and research, things can look tidy and elegant afterwards, but they're not obvious at the time, right? You can see some of those posts were like surprisingly close to Bitcoin concepts, like feeling around trying to figure it out, but didn't quite get there. So there's that component of it. So I think, Satoshi found that missing problem and found a solution for it, looked at it in a different way. I think sometimes you see with solutions to things, it's because somebody asked a different question, because sometimes if you ask the right question, you're like, oh,
if you don't frame the problem properly, you're not going to arrive at the right solution.
If somebody popped up on the list and said, why are we trying to create stable value? Why don't we just, let the market decide? And people cottoned onto that. Maybe we could have solved it, right? Because if you face, there's a lot of creative people that understood network architecture and cryptography, quite inventive, but just happen to look at it the wrong way. And but it is much harder than you would expect. So I think people's intuition when they see an elegant system is like, oh, that looks simple, and then they, if they're a programmer, they're like, I could have done that, right?
Yeah.
But, maybe you couldn't, because like a lot of people tried and it wasn't obvious. It looks obvious when you see a solution, but before you see a solution, you don't know where the solution is or if it even exists, right? So you kind of fumbling around in the dark, trying to find some intuition, trying out dozens of ideas and seeing they don't quite work. Now, the other interesting thing about Bitcoin now that it is here, so my experience was, so I see it and I'm like, well, it's got some inefficiencies, and there are ways it behaves that you would like to improve, ideally.
I've heard you speak about that, and it was, it was really amusing to me. Well, someone with your obvious intelligence and your pedigree from a technical point of view, and you struggled so hard to. Well, you tell the story, but I was just really amused by your telling of it. Yeah.
I mean, it's because there's this meme, right, which is the guy with a superhero cape, new to Bitcoin, here to fix it, right, and. So that was me in 2013. I'd seen the price levels get up to the point where I was like, wow, okay, it's clearly bootstrapped. There's a price, there's exchanges. It's going to take off, right? So let's join the party and see if I can improve it. So now it's a very reasonable intuition that some early technology would have lots of scope to improve, because that's the case for most things we interact with. First computer, first car, first airplane. The original thing is like, made out of balsa wood and it's, not safe and stuff, and it flies a few hundred feet and then it crashes and breaks or something, right? So that's a fair intuition, but when I got into it, it was my spare time for 3 or 4 months. So I really tried hard to improve different things, and you could improve some things, but you usually make a couple of other things worse, so then it's not worth doing, right? And so I went all through it, and I was like, that's amazing. Like, it seems to exist in this narrow design space, and anything you change makes it worse. Not my intuition, but there are probably some analogies like DNA. It's like that, right? All of life on Earth is using the same DNA. And there are some experiments to try and create synthetic DNA with a different protein in place of one of the base pairs, but generally speaking, it seems to be robust and there's nothing better, right? Because biology is quite good at finding solutions. And so it seems like that, right? And, then of course you've got the altcoin phenomena where they try to make the better Bitcoin. And, I find it laughable because, they just explore all the things that can go wrong, which are kind of obvious, because when I was like trying to change it, I was like, well, you could make the blockchain faster. Oh no, that would be bad. It wouldn't converge, it would diverge, and it'd get inefficient. And they'll do all the things that make it worse, right? And they'll declare it a success. Now, the one thing I did manage to do, which improved privacy, is confidential transactions. So I knew quite a bit about the previous electronic cash protocols. So Stefan Brands was actually David Chon's PhD student, and he developed a more efficient electronic cash protocol. I got to know him at a previous company, he's a friend of mine. And I'd read his PhD thesis, and I remember there was a footnote referring to something about range proofs, so kind of cryptography, which you end up needing. And there's another thing that I was aware of, which is Eric Hughes, the Cypherpunks co-founder, had posted this kind of thought experiment about maybe you could have a public ledger where the entries were encrypted in a way that you could still verify they add up. So it's called homomorphic encryption. And so Now I was thinking, well, I knew those two things. Maybe I could assemble a solution that could work.
So the individual entries can't be read, but the totality of the ledger would add up to a particular value that can then be validated through the whatever the key is.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So, if Bitcoin had it, you'd be able to tell that the encrypted ledger added up to 21 million or, however it's been mined so far today, right? But the individual entries, you wouldn't be able to tell. So, I mean, basically, if somebody's if they have a wallet with 5 Bitcoin and they're sending you 2 Bitcoin, all they would know is that they'd see like encrypted 5 and encrypted 2 and encrypted 3 and a little bit of coming out for a fee, but they wouldn't know whether that was, 200ths of a Bitcoin or 2,000ths of a Bitcoin or 1 Bitcoin. Couldn't tell, right? And so you can do that. You can do that with Pedersen commitments, just another type of sort of Schnorr and DSA related cryptography. But you have a problem, which is that the arithmetic in these things is modular, so it's like a clock face, right? It wraps around. So you're just gonna, if you're using a clock face and you say it's 9 o'clock and you're gonna add 6 hours, then it's 3, right? So you keep adding and the number always stays in the range. So you have the mathematics for this kind of cryptography has that modularity property, and so you can cheat. I can sort of create money by abusing this. So instead of encrypted 3 plus encrypted 2 is encrypted 5, I can send the encrypted 3 plus a massive number and print an enormous amount of money myself, and it still adds up because it wrapped around. And so you've got to somehow stop that. And the way you stop it, my idea was you need a range proof to prove that this encrypted number is small enough that it can't wrap around without revealing what the number is. And so that's where this kind of range proof concept comes in. So it's like some kind of zero knowledge proof. So I remember there's a footnote in Stefan Brand's thesis talking about how to do a range proof. So I spent, probably a month looking at all the academic papers on range proofs. But the one that worked best actually was this footnote, which never got published as a proper paper. It's just a rump session talk, so kind of informal talk at a conference without a paper. And Stefan Brands watched it and, wrote a couple of sentences in a footnote. But that was enough to recreate it and optimized it. So Greg Maxwell, so that was the idea, and I wrote about it on the Bitcoin Talk forum, and later started Blockstream to try and implement that in a sidechain, which is a way to get modularity in Bitcoin, and like a layer 2 kind of thing. And Greg Maxwell, took the ideas and made it real, fixed the bugs in the math and found another optimization to make it a little bit smaller. So, and we have it live in a liquid layer 2 network since 2018. And so we implemented it in a kind of library form a couple of years before that. So that was the one thing I found that I could improve. And it has a trade-off, it makes the transactions a bit bigger. But I think it's a nice trade-off.
Can I just wind back the clock a little bit? Because I'm fascinated about the very, 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 very beginning. Okay, so it goes out. Does he release the white paper first? Is that what he released first, and then Hal Finney ran Bitcoin and did his review?
So Hal Finney didn't run a review until the network was live. So he tried it out on a live system. I think Satoshi had emailed a few people beta code, but effectively, it's clear that Satoshi developed the system end to end by himself because, I went and read the forum posts afterwards because I didn't really I got some emails exchanges with Satoshi in August 2008. Maybe December or January, 2008, 2009. And then I didn't get, I read the discussion posts, I think participated a little bit in some of the discussion posts, but I didn't, get into the details until 2012, 2013, something like that. So it's on one of the forum posts when I went and read all the Satoshi posts going forwards, right? I saw that he said that he had to implement Bitcoin to be sure it worked before he wrote the paper. So if I was the first person to get an email and he's written the paper.
Because he wasn't sure it could be coded, is that right?
Well, he wasn't sure if it would work.
Okay.
And so, you can have a theory that this might work, but if it's a very applied topic, the only real way to be sure is to implement it and see if it works, because you'll make everything concrete. There's a lot of details that you're only going to find out by implementing it. So he did something like that, basically. That's what he said on the forum, right? And so then, so my logic is, he must have implemented it first, because he said that he implemented it before he wrote the paper. And, also that would be too short of a time to implement something that complex between August 2008 and January 2009. So I think I think he says somewhere else that he spent a year and a half. So, maybe he started in 2007, spent 2007 and like half of 2008 implementing it, write a draft paper, starts emailing the paper to people, and then publishes the paper. I forgot what date people found it, right? The date where he first published the paper, and then not long afterwards he releases a source code, and then the network starts running.
So the hardest thing to do when you're starting someone is getting anybody to pay attention to what you're doing, right? And so you're releasing an app or whatever it is, the first 100 users are just to get them. And I know he had a sort of captive audience, so to speak, with the Cypherpunk mail list, but how did he get the first 100 people to actually run Bitcoin, use it, give him some feedback?
Yeah,
or did that happen organically as a result of sending it through?
So we learned something about that quite recently, like last year, I think it was, because there was a COPA trial where COPA, which is a kind of not-for-profit started by Block, Square, Jack Dorsey. Mm-hmm. And so that was a trial against a guy from Australia who claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto. Yeah, and kind of, very clumsily and obviously not, but with a lot of money to spend on legal attacks, basically. So it really took Jack Dorsey, I don't know who funded it, if it's Square or Jack Dorsey, but to take the initiative and fight back with this court case. And so as part of the court case, they were trying to assemble historic evidence that would disprove what Craig was saying. So one of the things they did is they asked me for the emails I exchanged with Satoshi, which I hadn't published because I figured, it's polite to ask people before publishing their emails, and obviously you couldn't get a response from him because Satoshi stopped participating in 2011 or something. So I gave them their emails, and they said they actually were useful. I thought there was not much there, but they said they're actually useful. So I was like, okay, I guess that's more important to combat this kind of menace than email etiquette. But more interestingly, during the trial, Marty Malmy revealed a massive amount of emails that he'd been exchanging with Satoshi, because it turned out he was like a student and volunteered to help very early in Bitcoin, and developing the FAQ, running a web server for the forums and all this kind of stuff. And there's a huge thread, to your point about how do you bootstrap it, they're brainstorming about how to get anybody to pay attention. So no, I didn't know that was going on, but apparently they were trying to think of example use cases or narratives about why Bitcoin might be interesting, to try and coax anybody to pay attention to it. I don't know how long, I didn't read the emails, but I read an article summarizing it from somebody who read them all. There's hundreds of them. And so apparently it was like a startup growth hacking kind of thing, right? Because people's impression before seeing those emails has just happened organically, but apparently there was some attempt to push interest, right?
Yeah. I mean, even in such a concentrated target market, right? It's almost like fish in a barrel, but everyone's got their own projects and special interests that they're working on or reading up on. Everyone's busy, right? But it's fascinating to me. It's but how do you get people to actually pay any attention to you and just...
another data point which is interesting is Dustin Trammell. He's a kind of... I got to meet him because of a Bitcoin documentary, and they were interviewing both of us around the same time, so I got to hang out with him. So he's a kind of internet security kind of guy, right? So he knows a bit about encryption, he knows about forensic, network security, all this kind of stuff. So, and he'd stumbled across Bitcoin and mined it during 2009, like quite early. And so, I guess he's geeking out, he's having fun playing with the concept, running the miner, doing some test transactions. I think somebody said that recently I saw that he got the second transaction after Halfini from Satoshi. Does not seem to be widely known, but I guess he'd said that, that was his or something later. And, speaking of how do you get people to stay interested, he got bored after a while and he stopped running that thing and he went off and, explored some other stuff and didn't come back for years.
So customer churn was high in the early days, right?
Yeah, and he did a podcast explaining the experience, right? Because, I wasn't participating on the network, I wasn't running test transactions, so I didn't really have a vibe of, where these people were communicating, like on a forum in IRC or something. And I think there was some like OTC transaction places where you could, I don't know, send a PayPal payment and get some Bitcoin, or there's something going on, right, before there were proper markets. So anyway, he explains the experience, what it was like, the fact that there wasn't really that much going on, not many users. So quite interesting to listen to if you want to reconstruct an idea of what that was like. But apparently without much, in private collaborations, Satoshi and Marty were busy trying to brainstorm about how to get more people to come, or the people to stay, not come and try it out, get bored and go off. So Dustin, did pay it forward, because when he came back years later, he ended up using the Bitcoin wealth from those old coins that he'd mined to start a VC firm, Trammell Ventures, that's investing in Bitcoin startups. So he kind of paid it forward and tried to grow the Bitcoin ecosystem, build the application. So it's a pretty cool story in itself. But yeah, very interesting early stage. And it was, I think, probably a few years until there was an actual exchange that you could trade on.
Well, I guess a lot of people right now, when we see Bitcoin as what it is, $2 trillion market cap asset base, and we think, wow, so they must have just been really blown away in the early days. As soon as it was revealed, it was just a big bang. But it sounds like it was more of a whimper. It was quite an effort just to get anybody to pay attention to it. When you mentioned that you kind of left the scene for a while, and you came into Bitcoin, I should say, around about 2013.
Yeah, 2012.
Do you remember when you sort of stopped paying attention to Bitcoin, what kind of user base there was, or was it what sort of discussions were being had about it? Was it a main topic of conversation on the mailer list, or on the forums, or anything like that?
I mean, it wasn't on the Cypherpunks list, it was on the Cryptography list, which was, a bit more talking about applied cryptography for people working at companies or building software, less about the self-sovereignty, but there's a bit of overlap. So Satoshi posted it on there and on the Blue Sky forum, which is about decentralized tech, but not on the Cypherpunks list. And I think the first comment was from the guy that implemented CryptoKong, James Donald. So CryptoKong was an elliptic curve signature package, a bit like PGP, but with elliptic curves. So anyway, I think he was the first person to respond, and his response was that'll never scale. It's okay, there we go. The block size wars were predicted on day one, within a few hours of posting or something. So yeah, I mean, there was just, questions about how it could work, or there's a lot of security-minded people, so their job might involve looking at things designed by other people and poking holes in them and helping them to repair it and make it more secure. So they were asking questions about, well, why is this secure? What about that? And of course, the scaling questions well, it's broadcast. If you get 1 million users, how's that going to work, right? So, there's a little bit of that. And then that list was actually moderated by Perry Metzger, who, and I don't like moderation, right? So I get a bit of friction because, you get into an interesting conversation and you cut it off and it's oh, that's enough on that topic. I'm kind of bored of that one. And what do you mean? We're just getting started. What are you doing? So I kind kind of stuck to the Cypherpunks list a bit more because there's no moderation. But anyway, I think eventually Perry cut the conversation off because it's kind of got sick of hearing about Bitcoin. But
it's a little bit like Reddit right now. In some subreddits, they just won't have it. Absolutely not. Like they won't.
Yeah.
Even like in the traditional investment forums.
Yeah.
Any mention of Bitcoin will just get you banned.
Yeah.
Just can't do it.
I mean, it's interesting to me that there was some thread on. Recent thread on that cryptography list. They're still around, the Cypherpunks list and cryptography list, right? So there was some thread, some kind of no-coiner doubt about Bitcoin that popped up, maybe a couple of years ago. And I just, wrote a rant to say, like, what the heck, you guys on this list, they're all like super technical guys who understand cryptography or participated in like implementing and designing SSL, and like, you've got a huge technical advantage in understanding the fundamentals. You knew about electronic cash, electronic payment systems going back, even before Bitcoin, some of them. And here you are, like 15 years later, no coining. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, where's your mojo? Like, I don't know. The post is on the list. And
what was the reaction to that?
Not much.
Really?
But I mean, I was just kind of shocked that they would not find it interesting and get pulled into it and be like enthusiastic about Bitcoin. And not only they're mostly not, I mean, I think there's a few people that are interested, but not only they're not got interested, but they're no coining. It's like astounding, right? How could you come from that technical background and not find it interesting and not want to participate? So. Now, that's not the Cypherpunks, that's the kind of more technical, like applied people. And, I think a few of the Cypherpunks in there. Of course, the Cypherpunks has a lot of anonymity tech, so...
What do you think the aversion comes from? Oh, sorry, maybe it's not even aversion, maybe it's just merely a lack of interest in Bitcoin, but I guess that's an assumption on my part. Is there an aversion? Is there something cultural about what Bitcoin has become that keeps people away from it?
Well, I mean, the Cypherpunks were very bullish on bare electronic cash. That was like, of self-sovereignty tech, that was super cool, right? So they were really enthusiastic about DigiCash until it failed, and then they were pretty actively grinding away trying to find a solution. So I think, that the crowd of people that were actively interested in that would 100% buy into Bitcoin. But, I think time passed and some of them maybe, lost interest in that viewpoint or, retired or something. Like there's some, I was the young guy right back then, right? But I think the people on the cryptography list maybe want cypherpunk mindset, all of them, right? Maybe it's just their day job. They found it technically stimulating, but not like philosophically. We can use this technology to establish self-sovereignty in cyberspace kind of outlook, right?
So you stop paying attention all the while Marty and Satoshi are conspiring in the background to bootstrap this thing to try to get some attention and get people to actually try Bitcoin. Yeah. You go off and do whatever. Yeah. And then you come back in 2013, and what was the market cap of Bitcoin? Was it in the billions by then?
No, you can tell what it was because the two figures that so people would post in a forum, because reading Slashdot a bit back then, and it wasn't a main topic on Slashdot, but once it came up, so it would be a sort of psychological barrier, right? Bitcoin is past $1, so somebody who was tracking Bitcoin was enthusiastic, would try and get people to pay attention, and they posted Bitcoins across $1. So I saw that, I was like, maybe, and there were 10 million coins mined at that time, roughly. So that would be a $10 million market cap at $1, and then it crossed $100. That was the next one I saw. So that's $1 billion market cap. And now we are, 20 times more, right?
Yeah. I mean, most of my friends are fairly sort of conventional type of people, right? But I did, when I came to London, I sort of, some people put me up for a couple of weeks who were friends of friends, and I ended up becoming friends. And they were very sort of alternative types of people. And through the boyfriend of the girl that I knew, he introduced me to Bitcoin actually, like a few years after I arrived in London. He's like, "What is that?" He goes, "Yeah, you just you mine it on your laptop and it makes a bit of noise." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." But I didn't think anything of it, right? Because I didn't have a problem in my mind at that time.
Right.
And I didn't have a problem. In fact, I didn't recognize Bitcoin as a solution to anything until after I bought it. I got into it as a trade. Right. So it's like, COVID ruined my career and all the rest of that. And I had a little bit of money, couldn't find a job. And I'm like, because I'd noticed Bitcoin in 2013, like when I really started paying attention to it. And I just like, yeah, whatever. And then I was watching it when it came back down to it dipped under 200, it bounced up, and I was waiting. I said, if it goes under 200 again, I'm going to whack $1,000 on it and let's let that ride, right? I had a bit of money back then and it just never dipped back under 200. And I was just like, okay. So when it came time to buy, like late 2020, so Saylor makes an announcement, right? And I'm watching the charts, I'm looking for an entry. And then sort of it goes up and it comes back down. And around about October, when the parabolic run just about starts, I'm like, I'm not missing this again.
Well, I mean,
press the buy button.
That is a phenomena, I mean, because it's so volatile. And there can be, I mean, there's a meme for it, right? Waiting for the dip, and there's a skeleton sitting on a park bench. But it's a factor because, you will see a price level that it used to be, and you didn't get in there until like, well, if it would just go back there. And sometimes it never will.
That's a very natural impulse to have that, right? Because a lot of people do that. And there are a couple of things that I never fell victim to, which, by no special ability of mine, but I've never been jealous of people who were earlier than me because I recognize what an enormous risk they took. And to have that conviction or to even have that interest. So if you're on the Cypherpunks mailing list and you got in early on Bitcoin, well done. Like that's reward for a lifetime of interest, right?
I mean, seemingly most of them didn't, but there we go.
And the other thing was when it came time to buy, I never felt like, oh no, I need to wait until it gets back to a lower point than what I was watching it.
Yeah.
And so in one sense, like I was lucky I didn't fall victim to those two psychological fallacies. I'm actually really joyful when I hear about people who got in really early because I think they deserve it. I genuinely do. I don't look at it as like, oh, you were lucky that you got in and that's kind of unearned wealth. Having been through one cycle, I think it's very much earned wealth.
Well, right. I mean, I think there's another meme that does that very well, which is, it's saying you're lucky, and then, there's a straight line with a cyclist just...
The psychological trauma of the journey.
But then the actual journey, there's another picture, which is, he falls into a fire trap, he climbs out, and he nearly lands on some spikes, and he gets burnt.
But to do that, not in the face of enormous volatility, but widespread social ridicule, for example, to do that. And you're really an outcast from the start. And then you're obviously very passionate about something. You're onto a winner and you want to talk about it with people. And then you become a social outcast amongst your family, your friends, because they're sick of hearing about it as well. And I'm sure some people, wondered what the hell they've done. And have they entered into an alternate universe or something where everybody's just like, they can't understand what they see.
Well, I mean, even just volatility outside of Bitcoin is something that takes getting used to. If for people that have tried trading or investing on their own account, the problem is I was a bit of a day trader in the mid-90s, just trying to manage my own savings, and it's on E-Trade, and you don't have so much money because you're younger, and you put a trade on and it's like it's a few percent down and it's like, ouch, that hurts, that's real money to you, and what do you do about it? Right? Do you believe it's going to go up again? Do you eat the loss and sell it? And you develop some trading psychology of sticking with a trade if you believe in it, or in my case I was started trading in some kind of, global market, which was generally going up. And so, I was day trading in and out of tickers without really knowing that much about what they were. Or, I looked at the company, but I didn't try to research it or form a thesis that much. But the fact is that in that market, you could trade randomly and make money, actually, right? I was trying, but that's a fact of the matter. And then there was some kind of macro event, and the whole markets went down globally.
Would that have been the Asian financial crisis around that time?
Yeah, so this would be sort of 96, 97, something like that.
That's about the time, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's about the time.
And so that was instructive. So, that I didn't want to realize the loss, so stubbornness. And I did some rebalancing. So, sort of trade between something in the same sector where I thought it was a good sideways trade that would recover better. And then put a lot more thought into sort of value investing, what sectors I thought would be needed and in demand in a global bear market. People need healthcare. There's certain things they need, right? And sort of, basics. So one trade I did was I bought into Argos, which is a
UK retailer,
right? Yeah. It's great. It's like a store where you go into the store and there's just catalogs, and you sift through the catalog. And you go to the back with your ticket with a number on it, and they will fetch it from the warehouse behind. And they've got really best pricing because they save a lot of money on not having big store displays. So it's a good thing, and people in the UK love it, right? It's a nice place to buy stuff, and it wasn't doing very well in the market. And I was like, but Argos is great. Why is it suffering? So I bought it, and then it wasn't long afterwards that there was some merger and acquisition where obviously somebody else thought it was a good buy, and they bought the whole company. And of course, the whole thing popped by, I think, like 40% in a couple of weeks or something. So anyway, I think, I wasn't inclined to sell, and I was inclined to try to have a value thesis, like a value investor thesis. So, at some point along the way, and I bought into some IPOs, there were some government entities that were turned into private companies and turned into public companies and put on the stock market. So I bought some of those as well back in that time. But at some point I just focused on my career, working at software companies, and gave the asset management to some kind of fund manager. But when Bitcoin came around, I was like, well, this looks fun to trade. So I went back to trading a bit. But learning that psychological lesson of dealing with volatility, having a plan, having a value thesis, that was useful context for trading Bitcoin. And you quickly realize that it's a pretty difficult thing to trade, maybe a dangerous thing to trade, and maybe you shouldn't trade it. Because, one realization is that, looking at the history before I started in it, it was growing exponentially, basically, and it's intensely volatile. So, if you're out of Bitcoin, you're short, and then, you're basically hoping it's going to fall so you can buy it back later, but you just admitted that it's growing exponentially by the data. So that's bad odds. If you try to get out something that's going up exponentially and hoping it will drop, it could because it's volatile, but the odds are against you. So don't do that. So that was my first thing.
Yeah, if you think you're going to pick the bear market, you better pick the bear market. But even within that, there are huge spikes.
Yeah.
Upwards.
Well, I wasn't looking at the market cycle. So I think that was maybe a bit before people had developed a strong view about the halving cycle and stuff, because there was less data points. It's 2013, so that's the first cycle actually. So there's no cycle theory yet. So I was just assuming it's going to be it's continue to be exponential, and it's just volatile. And so just that data, that description of the market means you shouldn't trade it, right? You should just, selling it is dangerous. And so, I resolved that. So I really since then had trouble selling Bitcoin because, I did accidentally sell some Bitcoin once. it was like the exchange was lagging because the market was active, and so, you know, I'd bought some extra on margin or some cash, and then I was trying to sell it to realize a profit, but because the display was lagging, and I clicked more times than I thought. I woke up in the morning and logged onto it, and I'm like, holy moly, I sold more coins than I thought. That was super dangerous. So I bought them back quickly, but I was lucky and the market was a bit lower, so I actually profited from it. But that's the only time I accidentally did a short trade. Normally I hate that. I'm a long only kind of viewpoint.
Did you embark on any kind of like training or education to refine your trading?
No, it's like self-taught. I mean, I had in the UK A-levels, so I had done like maths, further maths, physics, but also economics. I was interested in like economic effects, macroeconomics, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was just sort of self-taught. And if you are trying to trade or trying to invest even, you become aware of inflation, because your objective with saving is to, you know, preserve your savings and hopefully grow them a bit. And then you realize you've got to do that in real terms, counteracting inflation, and that turns out to be quite hard to do. So yeah, you end up reading a lot about just like what's going on with macro, with interest rates, with global economic factors, trying to form a thesis for what you're doing, right? So it's self-taught, just doing things in the market.
What do you think of the market cycle since 2013 and how they've shaped up? Do you have a view of or a narrative of what actually happened through 2017, 2021, and where we are now?
Well, I mean, I think the prior cycle, of course, you had COVID was a big event, and then compounded with some misunderstood risk. So, you know, I've done a lot of different types of trading with Bitcoin, but I quite like arbitrage, because you can potentially make a bit of money on Bitcoin without taking a directional risk. So, you know, one example which I was doing in 2013 is cross-exchange arbitrage, which is the prices on exchanges would be persistently in one direction. So I was buying Bitcoin on BTCE and selling it on Bitstamp and then wiring the money back and doing it again. And it'd take about a week. And, you know, there's some reason, probably a risk premium. So I didn't trust BTCE, so I would take the money out, take the Bitcoin out immediately, right? That turned out to be correct. It did get haircut eventually, but luckily for me, I wasn't in it. So that's one kind of trade, like a risk-free arbitrage trade. Another one is, risk-free. There's a risk premium, but you know, you're not taking a directional. You're not making a directional bet, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You just
what they call it, delta neutral, with respect to the price of the underlying asset, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and also it's, you know, along the way, I redenominated my concept of what I was trying to do from trying to, you know, in the mid-90s, trying to achieve a positive return, inflation adjusted, to trying to achieve a positive return, Bitcoin denominated, because that was the unit of savings after some point.
When did you make that realization, though?
I'm not sure exactly, but it's got to be, it must be pretty early, because I was already doing the arbitrage, like cross-exchange arbitrage in 2013. So, yeah, I think I resolved that selling Bitcoin was dangerous because the exponential with high volatility. And then I, got a Bitcoin position. So then I wanted to try and capture a return on top of the Bitcoin basis. So I started a cross-exchange arbitrage, and something I got into more recently was borrowing against Bitcoin at traditional interest rates, 5%, maybe a bit lower if you do some creative things, and then relending it very short term at a higher interest rate. It's quite easy to get 10, 12, 15%.
How are you doing that?
Well, there are platforms that have margin lending. Mm-hmm. So there are people that taking directional bets who need to borrow dollars. And, the Bitfinex platform has this market rate way for people to borrow against Bitcoin collateral to take margin long positions. And the rate is very variable because, if there's some market opportunity that a bunch of traders seize on, they'll exhaust the capital and they'll push the rates up. And then you can, when you're placing the loans, you've got a duration choice between 2 days and 120 days. So I think the sweet point for what I wanted is 30 days. And of course it's a market, so you're placing a limit order that you want to lend a part of the money that you're trying to manage with this at a certain rate. Now, if you just blow out immediately and market place it, you'll get a bad rate and it won't be worth it. So you've got to sort of set a rate based on the recent averages that should get taken within a few days on average. So because you're not getting any interest while you're waiting with your limit order, but you can calculate, how much dead time it's worth taking to have a higher average rate. You've got to get a feel for it, but that's a play. But because the money that you're using is borrowed against Bitcoin, and Bitcoin can change drastically, you can't commit the lending too long because you can't cancel those loans. So you could have what's called a term mismatch rate, which is, you're stuck in a loan, you can't get the capital back, and you need to answer a margin call on the Bitcoin side. So you basically have to take, big safety buffer, and so that and then for the loans you're placing, you can ladder them. So you put 3% of the money on interest every day. And then they're 30-day loans. So every day you'll be getting 3% of the money back and relending it. And if the Bitcoin price is falling, then you'll start sending money back to your bank to cover, to shrink the loan as the collateral value is falling. And then there are other ways to do it. Another way to get an interest rate is called basis trading. And that is the perpetual futures, which is a higher leverage environment. And it's a bit like lending, but it's different. So what you'll do there is you'll say Bitcoin is $100,000. So you'll take $100,000 and which you've borrowed against Bitcoin, and then you'll buy more Bitcoin with it. So you buy 1 Bitcoin, and you put a Bitcoin as collateral on a perpetual future exchange, and then you short 1 Bitcoin. So now, perpetual futures are side contracts. So there's somebody long and somebody short. So if somebody's trying to bet that Bitcoin's going up, which is the bias, most of the traders are long, they need somebody to be short. So I look like I'm short, but I'm not really, because I've counteracted it by buying a Bitcoin that I wouldn't otherwise have. And then I collect a funding rate. When they get bullish, they push the funding rate up, and it can get quite high. It can get to like 30, 35% even in a bullish spurt, and it can fall back to, 5%. And if it gets bearish, it'll go negative, and you have to close the trade, because then you'll start to get charged. But the beauty of that basis trade on a perpetual future, which is not dated, it's a rolling contract, is you can cancel it immediately. So if the Bitcoin, if you're starting to getting risk of margin call on the borrowing side, if you put, let's say, 25% of the capital into this basis trade, you can immediately close that and reduce your margin call risk. So you do those 3 things, right? Have safety because you're staying a big margin away from the margin call level. Some in the lending markets, which have got a ladder, and then some in basis trade, so you can react quickly. And between those things, you can that strategy survived the biggest market shocks. So we've been doing it for a few years. When the Silvergate got shut down, it slowed down the bank transfers and it caused a price correction. And so it survived. That's a kind of black swan for that trade, and it worked for it. So I was sufficiently cautious that it worked.
Where do you think we are now? Because we bounced off the bottom of the bear market more than 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
Bear market's a distant memory.
Yeah.
But we haven't. It doesn't feel like we're approaching anything like euphoria at all. It's just this shoot up for about 6 or 8 weeks, and then a long consolidation that just saps the market of any kind of euphoria.
Yeah. It's funny, right?
And it's repeated 3 times so far in 2.5 years.
Yeah, people are trying to figure out who's selling, and you can see on because it seems like there's a lot of buying because you've got the metrics that you all know, which is that the ETFs have bought 2 times the freshly mined coins. MicroStrategy's bought another 2 times, and there are other strategy businesses or other treasury businesses, and individuals dollar cost averaging. So, just based on that, you'd think there's got to be like 5, 6, 7 times the amount of mined coins being bought. Mm-hmm. And it's true that the on-exchange coin metric is shrinking because people are taking the coins off the market.
Is it? That's being debated. I know that, what's his name? Checkmate and other analysts have also said that's actually just a constantly revised number because they're always finding new data and the number always kind of looks around the same when it's revised.
Well, I mean, it is a bit of a heuristic to collect that data because it's not transparent. But it's not a guarantee because people can put more coins onto the exchange, no notice. And some types of trades are not necessarily visible, like the ETFs are not on there. You see the ETF outflow and inflow, so that's kind of another heuristic input to that metric. So I don't know. Anyway, that's an argument that it's around 2 million and it used to be 3 million, so it's shrinking. By some people's claims, hard to prove it with heuristics. But clearly somebody's selling or the price will be shooting up because there's a lot of buying, right?
Well, that's the thing that the on-chain metrics seem to be showing up or detecting is that, yes, people who have held for, I think, 2 or 3 years plus are beginning to sell.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so these are the people who bought in the last cycle, obviously, and they've held through a bear market, and some of those coins are now being liquidated.
Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I mean, you could typify what they experienced. They bought at 50 to 60,000,
yes.
and they were welcome to the Bitcoin party. Experience was it dumped to 15,500, and probably some of them panic sold, some of them bought some more. But they didn't enjoy the experience, and now they're pleased to get out with double their money or something.
At 100K. Nice psychological figure.
Yeah, and they might, maybe people who've been around for longer feel like, no, look at the metrics. There's a lot more headroom here. It's cheap at 100K. That's how I feel. It's at 73.5K before the halving, right? So 100,000 is not much. It's probably, there's a lot of inflation going on. There's a lot of stuff that is, more treasury companies, highly successful ETF, improved regulations, improved outlook in different countries for ability to access ETFs, put them in retirement, like tax-free retirement accounts. There's a lot of positive things happening, and so 100K is nowhere near representing that. So I think it's just that the people from that epoch, what do they call it, like class of 2002, had a bad time with that bear market and they haven't been around long enough, so they decided to take a profit. And maybe some people are taking a part profit, right? And let's take some house money and let the rest ride. But they can only sell once, either if they're selling out completely, if they've got a fiat denominated mindset for their savings, or if they're taking a bit off the table and they don't want to sell under 100, so it gets up to 100 and they sell a bit and then they knock it down and they do it again, right?
It makes sense. It certainly makes sense to me. Interesting. What do you think of? So we've had an enormously successful ETF launch. I don't think anybody expected that kind of success from the ETFs. The first 12 months, the most successful ETF launch in history. The Bloomberg fellas tell us, and the data, proves that. Out, and now we're seeing a whole bunch of, we're seeing MicroStrategy absolutely take it to the next level, right? They've set the standard for corporate or Bitcoin treasury companies, and they're just, when they first announced that plan, I think it was in November 2024, we all thought that was wildly ambitious. And within the space of 3-4 months, it became quite evident that they're going to knock that out of the park quite comfortably, and then they had to issue a revised plan, which was basically double that, right?
Yeah.
So what do you, as someone who was there from the very early days, what do you make of traditional finance, Wall Street adoption of Bitcoin and these corporate treasury, Bitcoin treasury companies as well?
Well, I mean,
because there seems to be a lot of resentment about what is happening and not even caution, like cynicism about it.
Well, I mean, some people maybe we have the kind of anti-establishment or individual sovereignty view would say the suits are coming in, right?
They are coming in. That's absolutely what is happening.
But I mean, it's, you know, there are people who wear suits in their day job who are getting involved. That's true. But, you know, I think Bitcoin is orange pilling them. So it seems like it's not a neutral technology, and that people get to learn about it, and it starts to affect their incentives and the way they think and their planning time horizon, what they spend their time on. It seems to be generally a wholesome thing that make people think about the future.
Have you seen evidence of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, you can see some of the people that are involved they're not just trying to sell a product, they're getting it and they're saying quite insightful things about Bitcoin, you know, like Saylor and the BlackRock CEO, right? Is it Larry Fink?
Yep.
He is, you know, talking about Bitcoin on TV, and I was like, wow, he seems to get it. And you know, there are other people around, like Kathy Woods and the Fidelity, you know, Abby Johnson. It's like right at the top of the management is super interested in Bitcoin, and that's why Fidelity was early in Bitcoin. So it does seem to capture the imaginations of people from all kinds of different backgrounds for different reasons. So, you know, and then you see the phenomena of, you know, like El Salvador. You know, when that first appeared, I would have thought that somebody must have gone to El Salvador or somebody local and done some Bitcoin lobbying to persuade them to do it as a kind of, you know, inbound investment tactic or an economic tactic. But no, it was the president himself and his brothers were Bitcoiners. They thought it was their own idea, right? So that's interesting, right? That you've got, and now in the current US administration, you've got quite a few Bitcoiners in financial sectors of government policy and monetary policy in the situation, and different senators, and they are, you know, they have to disclose sometimes. And you see that they've, you know, their money's where their mouth is, right? Mm-hmm. They're not just talking shop to get elected. They bought into it. It's affecting the way they think. So it's, you know, the mind virus is real. You know, I mean, it's actually the talking about kind of internet and self-sovereignty and this kind of thing. There's this book, Snow Crash, which is, you know, talking about electronic cash and cyberspace, and it's a science fiction book that's quite old now, but still feels quite current if you read it. And in it, the Snow Crash is the name of a mind virus, so it's some kind of thing in the book. But with Bitcoin, you can see that it is a bit like a mind virus or something, because people get enamored by it, they get sucked in, you know, fall down the rabbit hole, and you know, then they start working for Bitcoin, right? And then they got to, you know, they feel energized, they have a mission, and it's contagious. They explain it to other people, they get other people enthusiastic. So it seems like it's scaling all through different parts of society and different, you know, people in different day jobs and different levels of responsibility in the financial sector and other sectors. So it does seem like it's the social scalability is much better than you might think. And then I think the other phenomena is with the Treasury companies, it's more about what Bitcoin can do for them. So I mean, Saylor has talked at length, actually. He's a very talkative fellow, right? And
have you met Michael?
Yeah. I mean, actually, when they first came on the scene, I thought, you know, they bought Bitcoin as a treasury and they just hold it. It was solving a problem, which is inflation. And you'd see Saylor, who was the CEO at the time, on TV for a couple of days, and that'd be it. But that's not what happened. He went down the rabbit hole hard.
Yeah, I think Saylor's just been a very powerful and effective advocate for Bitcoin, from politics, for corporates, you know, bridging Bitcoin into Wall Street as well. And I don't really understand sort of this blowback that he's getting. I guess there's for some people, there's a divergence, not just Saylor specific, but as we mentioned earlier, the suits are coming, right? And so they're starting to, it's starting to get their attention, like things like proof of reserves, everyone from Jack Mallers' company to whoever else is holding it, there's quite a bit of pressure on them to divulge their addresses and show that there is. What are your thoughts on that for a listed entity? Do you think it's essential for a listed entity to show proof of reserves?
Yeah, so I think the proof of reserves is, I saw Coinbase also say that they weren't willing to provide a proof of reserves or an address where their coins are. But it doesn't achieve that much because it's hard to hide that amount of coins. And some of the on-chain intelligence, like intelligence,
Arkham has identified, just about everybody's stash.
Yeah, so they're like, that's probably Coinbase, that's probably Saylor. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe because of that, but it's claimed that MicroStrategy's Bitcoin are held by a combination of Fidelity and Coinbase. And of those two, I personally prefer Fidelity because they are, they're doing their own custody. Fidelity has their own ETF, so they're doing their own custody for their own ETF. And they're also a custodian as a service provider. And so MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor, is using Fidelity as a custodian, but also I think it's diversified with Coinbase. The problem with Coinbase is a bit of a spotty record with operations and security. Their exchange will crash. It became known as the circuit breaker because you just get a nice rally and Coinbase would crash from the transaction load and that would take the wind out of the rally. And so the circuit breaker, right? Because that's a market concept. And it was pretty annoying for a few years there. They would just keep doing it. And it's not good, for, they're public companies, so some of the ETFs are using them, but they're kind of giving Bitcoin a bad name by not being able to keep an exchange running in a professional manner. So it seems to have improved a bit lately. But, just as a general proxy, if people are struggling with technology, you got to wonder, how good are they at custody, right? And too many ETFs are using them. There's a historic reason for that, which is the SEC under the previous US administration was quite antagonistic to Bitcoin and was rejecting all the Bitcoin ETFs. And there were like half a dozen of more of them, right? 8, 9, some of them. And, they'd all be looking at each other's rejection letters because they're coming out one by one. And finally somebody got the objection to the custodian withdrawn and they'd use Coinbase. So everybody's like, okay, they will pass Coinbase as a custodian, so they all copy-pasted that almost, apart from 2 of them, I think. One was using Gemini, which is the Winklevoss operated exchange, as a custodian. Fidelity using their own. But I think, and one of them is using Kamino, which is another custodian. But other than that, they're all using Coinbase, which is kind of centralization, single point of failure risk. So it's bad from a concentration, but also I've got some reservations about Coinbase's operational history. So anyway, I think the argument Coinbase put forward for not publishing addresses was that it'd be a security risk. And I'm like, well, what's the security risk? You can go look on the blockchain and see all the addresses and how much are in them. If there's a security risk from seeing the address, it's all hanging out there, right? Clearly there's not, definitionally, or Bitcoin wouldn't work. So one thing you might have to worry about, trying to steel man an argument for them, is that there are people spidering the network trying to figure out which IP address first injected a transaction into the peer-to-peer network. Because if you're running a node, it's on the network. But there are simple things you can do to counteract that. A lot of wallets are using an index server, and the transaction is not sent by your laptop or your phone, broadcast on the network. It goes by the index server. So your IP address is not visible to the network. So it's not a problem. Or if you are running your own node and injecting your own transaction, say with Bitcoin Core, then you probably should think about using a proxy or Tor or something to reduce that risk, because there are people spidering the network trying to pinpoint a geographic location maybe with quite precise coordinates about where that transaction came from, and that could be a bad idea. Like, maybe they'd know where your custody is taking place physically, and that could be a security risk. But, there are simple best practice solutions, so it shouldn't really be a problem to somebody who is doing this professionally, right? They should be able to hide it. So I'm not sure I agree with the proof of reserves. And of course, you just publishing the address doesn't prove you control them, right? So the proof of reserves is also sometimes making signatures to prove that you have the keys that you could spend them, right? So there's that. But I think generally speaking, the other part of Michael Saylor's point was valid, which is that's only half of the picture, because a company has got assets, you could prove you control the assets, also has liabilities, you're trusting the auditor. So, proving the reserves doesn't prove all that much, but it proves something.
But I also think when you buy MicroStrategy, you're not buying Bitcoin, you're buying MicroStrategy shares, right? And so their investors, they're used to that level of verifiability through an auditor, right? Like having a top 4 auditor is the level of transparency and assurance that they're accustomed to if you're buying a security that's listed.
Yeah, it's generally good, not 100% though. Enron committed a lot of fraud and that was a public company, right?
Sure.
So, but I think it's pretty good assurance. And of course the interesting phenomena with the Treasury companies that Saylor started is that, saying I thought that he would just buy Bitcoin, put it on the balance sheet, and then continue to run his business, but actually he got pulled in and tried to buy more Bitcoin and more Bitcoin. And it just kept going. And so people were like, wow, these guys have got, they've really got the bug for accumulating Bitcoin and they want to keep ramping it up. And then it started to be the case that the company was valued at a multiple of a Bitcoin because they were accumulating Bitcoin per share fast enough that it made sense to, for the fair market price of that combined strategy to be worth more than the NAV of the Bitcoin. And that, that phenomena, seems to be sort of hard to wrap your head around why that is the case. Or I think the thing that probably really, the fact that they are taking long-term debt, like corporate bonds or convertible notes, which are even more efficient to do it, they could understand that. But then, because they now have, you can see the bootstrap, right? That because they're taking long-term low-cost debt to buy Bitcoin, they can reason there is a fair market premium. But then because there's a fair market premium, they're able to sell shares into the market to raise capital to buy more Bitcoin.
And then do it again.
Yeah, which sort of sustains or even grows their rate at which they accumulate Bitcoin per share. They call it yield, but it's Bitcoin per share. And so that seems a little bit self-referential, right? So Jim Chanos, who's a short trader, who's trying to short MicroStrategy at the moment, he's short MicroStrategy, he's long Bitcoin, but he's not, a Bitcoin bull. That's a hedge. So what he's trying to do is short the premium on MicroStrategy. And so he makes you that argument, right? Which is, well, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the, is there a yield because there's a premium, or is there a premium because there's a yield? And it's a bit of both. And
from what I've observed, MicroStrategy's ability to generate finance to buy Bitcoin increases the faster the Bitcoin price goes up.
Yep.
Right? And so I would say that it starts with Bitcoin, and then that kicks off a process until such time that the price of Bitcoin either stagnates and consolidates, maybe even draws down a little bit. But yeah, and they just played a game of getting the debt when the price is spiking, and then the equity gets re-rated, and they sell the equity to buy, and they just repeat that process while the market is hot.
Yeah.
And then when the market cools down, they do more conservative financing.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's I think it's an arbitrage that works because Bitcoin is undergoing adoption and going up over long periods of time. So month to month, year to year, it can be up or down or sideways. But over a 4-year period, it's generally been up. And so that is a bet that a lot of people are willing to take. And it's a bet that MicroStrategy is taking. So you'll see their convertible notes and their bonds are all like 5 years to be well past.
Oh, more than 5 years. Some of them are like 6 years, I think. I'm not sure if I've even seen a 7-year term, but I've definitely seen many of them well into 6 years.
Exactly, yeah.
And so like that's a risk mitigation, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm quite comfortable with it in that term. And actually, when MicroStrategy started on this, I bought some of the stock because I was thinking, Bitcoiners should support this because it's an interesting new use case for Bitcoin, for corporates to use it to protect their cash reserves from inflation, right? So, and he didn't just do it, he tried to persuade other companies to do it, ran a conference series trying to explain to other companies to do it. So I wanted to support him in like a simple way to support him is to buy a bit, and maybe if enough Bitcoiners buy some of his stock, the Bitcoin has become a decent proportion of the stock, right? It's a big company, but it's not big compared to Bitcoin.
The reason why I love what he's done is like when he first bought it as a Treasury reserve asset, he outsourced all the logic, the models, everything, and then he went on this campaign to try to convince other companies to do that as well. Yeah. And he was pretty reasonably successful at doing that, at least getting the ball rolling, right? And we're starting to see that gaining more momentum. And as Strategy has developed this new finance model, I don't know if I want to call it finance engineering, but it is, right? Because it might have different connotation for some people. Mm-hmm. It is financial engineering, and he's also outsourced that playbook as well. So he's been in service of Bitcoin. He's been tremendously effective in both instances in doing that, because usually when people have some kind of alpha, some kind of advantage, you just keep it to yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody from a banking background asked me how scalable I thought, we're talking about the Treasury play, how scalable I thought it was, or if too many companies get into it, if how hot that can run would get compressed. Or it would stop working. And, thinking about it for a short time, my response was, no, actually, I think it's extremely scalable for the reason you gave, which is that it's an arbitrage between the fiat world and a Bitcoinized future, which is a few hundred trillion. So effectively, it's the arbitrage of the century. And this is, basically looking at the long-term Bitcoin growth and trying to accumulate Bitcoin. That's the profit motive, right? When you participate in an arbitrage, you are trying to make a profit, but you're also improving the market because you're fixing a pricing error. So I'd say the pricing error is the world should be priced in Bitcoin. It's just most people are asleep at the wheel and haven't figured it out yet, right? So now you have a vehicle in the market to fix the pricing error. And so I think all the Treasury companies are doing it. So, it's so much, there's such a big dislocation that they can all do it, and it'll still take them years, right?
Well, Michael Saylor specifically mentioned that his target was the fixed income asset pool, which is what, 100 trillion or how many?
Yeah, it's huge.
And he said, I want 2% of that, right? So that's 2 trillion potentially flowing into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And who knows how long that takes, right? At the moment, I think, have they spent about $60-70 billion worth on buying Bitcoin? Yeah. And that's just them. And it's accelerated in the last, since November 2024. So maybe the floodgates are open and this is just a new normal for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I mean, it's picking up, so there are more companies now, and companies in different countries. So, you've got, I think Semler was the second company.
Yeah. I spoke to Eric yesterday for the first time. He's great.
Yeah, and then you start to get some more regional companies, maybe providing local advantages, like Metaplanet in Japan. There's some tax issue where capital gains on Bitcoin are taxed at 55 and on shares at 20. So, for anybody who wants to trade Bitcoin, it's much more cost efficient to do that using Metaplanet. Plus, they're using the the same playbook, get the flywheel going, get the MNAV, do the ATM. So they have actually basically no debt, and they're just doing an ATM-like strategy. Because it's quite volatile, it will move between 5 and 10 times MNAV, which is quite high, but it's a very active trading environment with a lot of retail traders. So they keep it buoyant. They're active traders. They see some volatility, they'll play with it if it's volatile, right? So that seems to be sustainable for them. And now you've got the blockchain group, AltBG in Paris, also doing quite well.
Yep.
And
Blockchain group, Smarter Web Company in the UK.
Yep.
There are a few others. There are many others that have made announcements, but they kind of look dodgy in the sense that extremely small market cap and making announcements like, oh, we're going to buy up to many, many millions, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, hang on, why are you releasing this through PR Newswire instead of making an announcement through your listed exchange, for example, which is the proper way of making an announcement to the market, right?
They have to be careful because particularly in the higher tier markets, there are quite strict rules about information disclosure, uniformity, and through the market official mechanism. Another one more recent is H100, which is a Swedish.
Oh yes, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
And that's been flying as well in terms of very rapid growth, like high yield or high increase in Bitcoin per share, a relatively high MNAV, and they're also trying different market mechanisms. So the blockchain group introduced a Bitcoin basis convertible note. So the debt is Bitcoin itself. So for the investor, they're lending Bitcoin to the company with a right to convert it if it reaches a conversion premium, and then they get shares, and then they can then sell the shares if they want or hold them. But they have the assurance that if the share price failed to reach the premium during a 5-year period, they just get their Bitcoin back. So. And the company, particularly the important part is the company wouldn't have a large euro debt, because they went from 40 Bitcoin to 720 Bitcoin in one transaction. And if that was a debt, what is that? It's like 15 times long, or it's like some huge leverage, right? So that would be, an insane leverage ratio if it was a euro debt. But it's not. It's a Bitcoin debt, and so that instrument actually is maybe a safer, higher, and both safer and higher velocity mechanism. And so H100 is using the similar mechanism as well in Sweden. So maybe we'll see other companies maybe that'll find its way back in the US, and some of those will do it.
So where do you see the risks in what's happening with these types of companies?
Well, I think people should bear in mind it's a kind of Bitcoin derivative. So of course you haven't got self-custody, you haven't got the coins, and you're paying a premium. So there is a risk that you buy it at too high of a premium, and the premium erodes, and then you'll lose money in Bitcoin terms. So one way to try and evaluate that risk I arrived at after trading in it for a few years is that you can work out how long you've got the premium, the MNAV, the multiple of market cap relative to the net asset value of Bitcoin. And let's say, in MicroStrategy, it's been around 2 lately. So that's to say that you are paying double for the shares, the Bitcoin content, right? And then the question is, well, they're also adding Bitcoin, they're increasing the Bitcoin per share. So if they continue with the same annualized rate of accumulating Bitcoin per share, how long would it take until it reaches the same multiple? Because that, if you get into it and it continues to accumulate at that rate for that duration, then after that you're safe. Now you have an entry point which is equivalent to buying at 1 times MNAV, which will probably be as if you were an investor when they started doing Bitcoin or something, and then you're de-risked. And so you can quantify that. You calculate from the yield public data and the MNAV, which they publish, how long it is. And in the case of MicroStrategy, it's about 16 to 18 months, which is not bad. Because what you'd be worried about is if it's 2 times, and Bitcoin will eventually get saturated. Don't know if that's in 10 years or 20 years, but you'd be worried that at that point the premium will probably drop to 1, because it's relying on the whole effect is relying on the Bitcoin growth, and then it would be more sort of slow growth rate. So if you buy it at 2 and the growth stops, you could lose money when it compresses to 1. So you want to sort of project, could it exceed 2 between now and when Bitcoin is fully done? And the answer is, well, they did 2 in the last 16 months. And presumably the full adoption is a decade or 2 away. So then that starts to feel much safer, right? But there's no guarantee that this yield will continue. So you are taking risk. There's no return without taking on risk, and there is risk. And there are starting to be more of them, some of them smaller, and maybe without as much, experience running companies and managing debt ratios and regulations. And so, there's scope that somebody does something too aggressive, like takes on too much debt ratio into a bear market or something. So
I think that's almost guaranteed to happen.
There are enough of them that somebody will probably do something silly. Yeah.
And my I guess my fear is that, my expectation is that that's going to invite speculation on the rest of the sector. So it might start at the long tail of mismanaged smaller entities, and then that's going to invite more scrutiny, short sellers, premium compression, and if that coincides with a bear market that doesn't even really have to be as severe as what we've previously seen, we could start seeing the compression go negative. The compression of the premium go negative, and then we've got the issue of, okay, how many of these companies are going to be able to resist the temptation to sell Bitcoin to buy back their shares? Because if their stated aim is to increase Bitcoin per share, that's the financially rational, I think logical move.
They should actually do that, yeah.
My expectation is that the sector is going to be pumped full of cash, because there is a huge appetite for this trade from TradFi, from hedge funds.
Yeah.
And otherwise they wouldn't be starting up these entities. I think MicroStrategy, or Michael Saylor's strategy, has already demonstrated the huge appetite, and everybody else is wanting to replicate that. And I think there will ultimately be 2 or 3 major companies, and then the liquidity of their size will be a factor, and everybody else will be in a long tail, similar to what's happened with Bitcoin ETFs. There are really 3 really successful ones. The 4th and the 5th are sort of okay, and then the rest are just not really viable.
It's a bit hard to predict, but I do think it's interesting. I mean, there are differences with them, right? There's the management team. Do you know them? Do they understand Bitcoin? Are they Bitcoiners? And do they know how to operate a company? Are they good at execution? Because a lot of this is about ability to execute that strategy, consistently and rapidly. And then there are geographic things, so one in a different country or different region is interesting, because it will have sometimes stocks that are in country are treated differently, so
treated differently by who? Investors, regulators, tax
and regulators. So, for example, I believe in France, I'm not a French taxpayer, but this is what I hear, that they can put a French stock into a PEA, which is a kind of tax advantage retirement account or something, and if they hold it in that vehicle for 5 years or 10 years, for some number of years, there would be no capital gains tax when they sell it. Whereas if it was an international stock, it's not available. So it's kind of, a lot of countries try to incentivize local investment, right? I mean, sometimes there are tax perks to investing in small caps to drive innovation. So there are lots of different things that are local. And sometimes there are local quirks, like we were talking about earlier. The UK has had some restrictions on buying ETFs because the regulator is a Bitcoin skeptic, a no-coiner. And so people couldn't put Bitcoin in a tax-free savings vehicle like an ISA. And then you've got the Japan where there's a different tax rate on Bitcoin versus stock. So there are local, it's interesting for there to be a company or a couple of competing companies in a jurisdiction if there's some unique things about that jurisdiction, right? So I think that gives something a reason to have a persistent, advantage in competition versus some international ones. Plus, probably people are, culturally like to support a local company, or they know the people in the local, community or something like that. So it's interesting, and they're using different vehicles, right? So they're using converts. Some of them are using ATMs only. Like Metaplanet is basically using an ATM-like thing only. Only very recently did they use a convertible to actually have any debt at all of appreciable size. The Bitcoin basis one is very interesting because it shows that you could use a convertible structure without creating a debt risk. To your point about you could have a compression wave of the premiums. I think interesting. You can see some examples of companies that have compressed and then reinflated, like recovered their MNAV.
Well, that happened to MicroStrategy.
Yep.
All right. We saw they had the discipline.
Yep.
Michael Saylor had the conviction and the courage to hold, and he is absolutely determined never to sell his Bitcoin. Right. And he set that precedent by having gone through the bear market and done that. And so there's a great deal of confidence in what he says that he means that he's not going to sell Bitcoin.
Right.
So that's why I'm not addressing any of my concerns regarding MicroStrategy and probably the next two biggest companies. But the long tail, I would be very cautious about, and I wonder what the effect that's going to be. Because, for example, if that happens to the long tail, right, these short sellers, they're like sharks, right? They're going to start circling around the next victim, the next. And I remember, because my experience in the last bear market running this account was everyone's talking about Michael Saylor's strategy going to get liquidated, right? And I went through the documents as they were being announced. There is no margin call. Right. Verifiably, you could refute that. You just read the documents, right? Yeah. And I posted that numerous times, and yet every single day in the media was about Michael Saylor's company going to get margin called. It was all on the timeline. All the macro head morons were talking about his liquidation point.
It's a problem in the Bitcoin markets in general, which is the mainstream financial media is really not understanding Bitcoin markets. So they'll see some event and they'll provide some commentary. And typically you can counter-trade their commentary because they misunderstand it so badly that they say it's going to have the opposite effect of what it obviously will. Prime example, China mining ban. Next day they're on Bloomberg or the CNBC. This is bad for public US miners. What the heck are you talking about? Yeah. It's a windfall for public US miners. So you see that. I never really traded the mining stocks, but some of the things they're saying, you can counter trade it. So like, oh, we saw this development. It's bad. They say it's bad. Some people listen to them. The price corrects. You buy the dip. The smart money piles back in. And you're in profit, right? So it's kind of fun, the information asymmetry, you can counter trade it, but it's also a bit disappointing. And, it's a little shocking that they feel at liberty to, make just grossly inaccurate claims about a public company.
Without consequence.
I think in some sectors, if they tried that to, JP Morgan, they'd probably get a pretty hefty legal threat, like next morning, right? So they'd be more cautious, and they know it. Be more cautious about being accurate, because some of those big companies don't take it they take it seriously if somebody, impacts their shareholders with false information or demand a correction or something, right? But Bitcoin, Bitcoin is like decentralized and
there's no CEO, there's no board of
yeah,
directors.
we used to be in the butt of everybody's jokes, right? So we don't. I mean, maybe we don't even care, but it is kind of a bit ridiculous.
I think it serves as a fortifying mechanism for the community.
Yeah.
Because what it does is inevitably it prompts us to discuss it, digest it, and come up with refutations, right? And talking points, and we meme facts into reality as a result of that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of helps us digest our thought processes as well.
Yeah.
And it makes us more resilient.
It does. Well, I mean, it does seem like, you got the honey badger meme and the Hulk meme, which is that, you make him mad and he gets stronger.
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin is just going from strength to strength while people are, making silly no-coiner comments for decades.
You talk about anti-fragile, right?
Yeah.
How is it the author of the book just doesn't get it?
Well, yeah, it's kind of...
Because he seemed to get
ironic.
it at one point. And he had a moment during the last cycle where he just flipped completely.
I mean, one theory is the Bitcoin derangement theory, which I think is Max Kaiser's theory, which is that...
Do you think it was personal enmity towards certain people in the space?
I mean, some of those people can be kind of caustic in their comments, so he might have just been insulted by something somebody said. I don't know.
But then he started trying to make intellectual arguments against it, right?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. So on the compression, an example of, just watching what happened and maybe what protects things from compression is Metaplanet. They peaked at 10 times MNAV in February. It crashed afterwards. It fell. They have a limits on the market. So you got a limit down 3 days in a row. It reopened at like 350, 380, something like that. So almost halved. People got depressed. It traded sideways for a couple of months. But while this was going on, so the investors are depressed and the MNAV is down, right? So, what happened is they kept running the ATM and it went from 1,760 Bitcoin to 5,000 Bitcoin in a couple of months. The market woke up and realized, wait a minute, the MNAV is 2.5. That's cheap. People start buying it. The MNAV starts to go up. The momentum traders jump on. And now the MNAV's up in the 7 or 8 range. So you see, it was generally trending in the 5 to 10 range. The continued acquisition of Bitcoin using a repeatable process is a risk to any short seller. It's continued pressure from below. So, if you keep going, I think they get swept out by the Bitcoin accumulation engine. So I think maybe the risk is more whether their accumulation mechanism, where people can find accumulation mechanisms that work reliably at high velocity in a bear market. And the only company that's really been through a bear market is MicroStrategy. And the way they coped with it was not good. Like, they took on a lot of debt, and their debt was larger than the net asset value of Bitcoin for 5 months in the bear market. But they learn, they're adaptive. Now they have only 15%, and it's intentional. They learn, they're being cautious, they're using different instruments, so they're getting smarter and very agile. So it's quite impressive what they do. But I'm just saying that we've yet to see the market find a nice way to progress through a bear market. I think Saylor's got the makings of it with the preferreds, but maybe there are some other vehicles. We'll see how the other companies innovate in the next cycle.
So Adam, speaking of cycles, inevitably, like you said, markets tend to overshoot. Where do you think we'll end up hitting before this cycle peaks?
So it's not so clear like when the peak will be in the cycle, because the last cycle, you had the 66, 69, then a bit of a bear market, and then 73.5, all in the same cycle, in the same halving cycle. So I'm thinking that 100, 110 is extremely cheap given the backdrop, and that before the next halving we could see between 500,000 and 1 million and a few other people sort of indicate the same thing. And I mean, it's partly because the people selling are going to run out of coins to sell, and there's a lot of buying and a lot of positive news flow that will start to take effect. I mean, financial institutions can announce they're going to do something, but maybe they'll actually start doing it in anger 6 months or a year later. So those things will start to kick in. And Bitcoin market's quite reflexive. A lot of TradFi traders and fund managers are momentum traders at heart. If something goes up, they'll buy it. And so it's a bit of a news cycle thing, right? The fact that Bitcoin price is up is then on the financial news. People see things on the financial news, they want to ride it up, they'll buy it. Sometimes people who sold at 100,000, if it gets to 120, maybe they'll buy back in because they're like, oh, maybe the top is not 100, maybe it's 200. They'll buy back, right? And then, so you got this, that you can get kind of insane rallies because of this phenomena, right? So we don't know how, the exact timing or anything. It's very organic, but I think it's got a lot of room to run personally. And I mean, actually, that might. There's a few theories kicking around. Like the power law, the stock to flow, and diminishing returns is built into some of those things. So, people's evidence for diminishing returns is that the sort of cycle to cycle price growth between the last two cycles is smaller than the one before. And so sample of two, the next one will do the same. Okay, but the previous cycle was a lot of one-off headwinds. COVID, supply chain, quantitative easing, DeFi, the whole high yield crash around Genesis and 3 Hours Capital, FTX, it's all in there, right? And so what if instead the last cycle was, cut short? And also another kind of what if is technology typically has an adoption S-curve where you've got a gradually at first. The early adoption of cell phones, which were bricks, expensive, very few people had them. They got cheaper, more people had them, so they became more valuable having them because you could interact with more people. Suddenly they took off, and then in a short period of time it went from 5% of people having them to 95. The amount of time between them existing and 5% was a long time, but the amount of time between, cross some threshold and it takes off, right? So now, the power law, people claim that, that's all baked in, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that Bitcoin is more than just a network. You only need one cell phone or a couple of cell phones. With a Bitcoin, if you bought, you stacked 1/10 of a Bitcoin, you're not satisfied, right? You get more conviction, you want another one. It pulls people in.
Demand creates demand, right?
Yes. So, there's another network effect in there, which should fundamentally mean that, other people adopting will give people mojo that they need to get more conviction and more people to talk to, more people to transact with, more use cases, more financial products, more ability to, do Bitcoin related mortgage, more use cases. These are all network multiplying things, right? So from that point of view, it seems reasonable to me that you could get the opposite of diminishing returns, which is accelerating returns when an S-curve gets steeper in some technology, and this network has more than, just user communication, but, people wanted to buy more Bitcoin, right? When users are using, I don't know, WhatsApp or Telegram or some chat application, and it's a new application and it gets through an adoption S-curve, it's not like the existing users pile in and they buy 10,000 phones so they can do more of it. But you have that in Bitcoin, right? It gets more popular and people start to want to buy more of what they already have. So that's an extra factor. So we'll see, but this might be the halving cycle where we get to find out if a diminishing return theory is correct or not.
This current one where... Yeah, it's interesting. Adam Back, thank you so much for your time. It's been something I've looked forward to and it hasn't disappointed. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Likewise, great talking. All right.
Thanks for your time, man. You've been really good. Yeah.